Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the meeting of the Swansea Bay City Region Joint Scrutiny Committee. Just to make you aware that today's meeting will be recorded. I can also welcome the members of the public and the press to today's meeting. Can I kindly ask you to observe the meeting only and not to speak or participate? Can I please remind you to switch your phones off or put them on silent during the duration of the meeting? In addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings? Your microphone should be switched to mute unless you are speaking. The Democratic Services Officer will take a roll call at the start of this meeting for all members and officers. Should you wish to ask any questions or make a comment, could you please indicate either via the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. I will assume that you have all read the paperwork before today's meeting. When asking a question, could you please indicate which page number you are referring to? And finally, when speaking, please introduce yourself. I will now call on the Democratic Officer to take a roll call.
Yeah, so Councillor Rob James, I know you're here as present, so I'll mark you down. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, present, thanks.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Yes,
Councillor Sharon Freegard.
Charlotte, I've had a text her. She's trying to join. She's having problems getting in.
Oh, right, okay.
Carry on, Sir. I'll try her now.
There we are. Thank you, Stace. Councillor Philip Downing.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Jan Curtis.
Yes, present.
Councillor Michael Evans.
Present.
Councillor Jamie Adams. Councillor Tony Barron.
present.
Councillor Giles Morgan.
Present.
Councillor Darren Price.
Present.
Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yes, yeah.
There we are. If I just move on to officers now. Jonathan Burns.
Yeah, present.
Greg Jones.
Yes, present. Thank you, Charlotte.
Amanda Burns. Wendy Walters.
Yes, present. Sorry, can I just have noted, I need to leave at 3 o'clock for another meeting, I'm afraid. I hope that's okay.
Yes, no problem. Thank you. Mike Shaw.
Present.
And Stacey Curran. Present. If I've missed anyone at all, can you let me know now, please? I think that's it, Chair.
Thank you. Whilst we're on the matter, Jonathan, could you just briefly, or Wendy as well, could you just briefly give us an update on the recruitment for new officers as part of the Swansea Bay City deal?
Yeah, Chair, that's part of my briefing on the programme update. So, yeah.
Okay. There we are. Fantastic. Right. Minutes of the previous meeting for approval. So it was on the, gosh, a long time ago, 15th of January 2020.
Chair, can I say I've got item 1, declarations of interest.
Is that and the next item, Mike? Number 2,
Okay.
yeah?
Okay, I got it down as 1 on mine, but okay.
Okay, I'll take it after that. So minutes in for approval, 15th of January 2020. Can I have someone move that the minutes are a true reflection of the meeting?
Yeah, I'll move, Chair.
Yeah. Anyone second it?
I'll second those, Chair.
Okay. Could I just have a show of approval with your virtual hand, please? Yeah, seems like everything's fine. If everyone wants to lower their hand, does anyone want to raise anything about the minutes of the last meeting? No. Okay, declarations of interest. Councillor Mike Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, in respect of item 4, Swansea Bay City Deal Projects Update, I'm Designer Crime Officer with South Wales Police, and I'm involved giving a number of advice on design of crime with a number of the projects in Neath, Talbot and Swansea. So that's why I'm declaring interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members?
Chair, is there a need for myself, because I'm SRO for City Deal purposes, but also if there's a discussion on the Delta project in Llanelli. I'm also the Chief Executive of the lead sponsoring authority.
Okay, thank you. Noted. Anyone else? No. Okay, then we go on to the next item, the Swansea Bay City deal. I guess you can just take the next two items together or separately. Jonathan, is up to you how you want to do it.
Yeah, I'll probably merge them into one. I got some slides to share with the group chair, so I'm going to share my screen. If there's any problems, just let me interject whenever you can. So what you should see, so you can see that screen, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of the four things that I'll cover today, but I'll take each one as individual. So one is about the city deal update, and then project updates, and then stuff around risk and COVID impact assessments, and then the kind of program monitoring, all the stuff around implementation plan, etc. So those are the four things that I'll cover. In terms of PMO update, so when I did a briefing session probably about 2 months ago, we were in the process of submitting the implementation plan, the program business case. Those have now been transferred into what we call now the portfolio business case. It's in draft. It's not been shared regionally because the information contained within it is the same as what we had in the previous documents. But what this does now, it better aligns it to the Green Book and the Better Business Case guidance. So that is a Welsh and UK government requirement. So the portfolio business case is approximately 50, 60 pages long. It covers 5 different aspects: strategic case, the economic case, the financial case, commercial case, and the management case. And effectively, all that does is make sure that the portfolio, the whole series of 9 projects, are all strategically aligned, they're economically viable, they're affordable, they go through the appropriate commercial routes procurement, and that they are managed appropriately. So in conjunction with that body of that document, there's probably best part of about 20 appendices that we will continue updating on a regular basis and reporting those regionally and to Welsh and UK government. So that's one of the key things I wanted to highlight. Part of that process was around the accounting officer review, so what they call an AOR process. So that effectively meant over about a 5-week period, 8 Welsh Government officials reviewed our portfolio business case and they fed back comments. We had 143 of them. The PMO responded to every one of those comments, and we will now have a series of recommendations from Welsh Government and UK Government to move forward, but as a normal monitoring process to go forward. So the things that you would expect to see in there are things like robust economic appraisals, financial appraisals, regular reporting, and templates associated with those. One of the things, which is the last bullet point there, it's about the terminology that we've used to date for the Swansea Bay City deal. So what we were originally told is that it's a programme, but now through this process, we are now calling the 9 projects associated with the city deal current. They are the portfolio, and that's why we have a portfolio business case. Within that, we will have projects and programs, and we're defining those and making sure that we manage and govern and assure things appropriately and report on them at a project and program level. And without getting caught up in terminology and what all that means, for me, it's making sure that we're doing the right thing in the right way, and that the governance and reporting is appropriate for whether it's a series of projects within a program or a project in its own right, but they all fit within that umbrella portfolio. So that's the P3M bullet point there. The you asked Chair about the recruitment, so that's gone really well. We've recruited 4 new people to the PMO. That all took place pretty much in around August, September. It was quite intense, but we got there. All of our interviews were conducted through Teams online. That went very well, actually. So we've recruited 4 new people. So the first person to start was Holly, and she is our administrative assistant. Holly started with us a month ago. Second to come in then was Amanda Burns. Amanda said present earlier on. So Amanda is the senior support officer looking around assurance, governance, reporting. So Amanda started with us last week. Today we have a new recruit, Ian Williams, who was in Neath Talbot Council prior to taking the role, and that is a program development manager, looking at business cases, strategy, etc., and supporting our teams to work with them, or writing things himself and including stakeholders in that process. The fourth person then is a gentleman called Phil Ryder. Phil is going to start with us on the 24th of November and will be the PMO manager. So effectively, those 4 posts were what the region deemed as effectively essential to get our portfolio up and running, governed, assured, reported, and developed in a robust kind of way. Okay, and then the last bit there is around the external stage gate review. So we instigated this, Wendy as SRO commissioned this, and we had an external stage gate review where a team of external people came in and they interviewed best part of 23 people, I think it was, or 22 people across the region and Welsh and UK government officials. They all input, and we had a series of recommendations that we will now put forward as our action plan in conjunction with the accounting officer review recommendations. So effectively, we will have a work program set within coming weeks for that, going forward at least until Christmas, if not going beyond that. So those are the 5 things, Chair, that I wanted to update on the PMO. Do you want me to, at this point, cover?
Yeah. Wendy, did you want to come in at all on this, or?
Sorry, my computer's on go slow today. No, it's just to reiterate that, well, I'm hoping members will see that there's been quite a bit of progress, and the officers, you know, hand it to them. They've done an awful lot of work over the last few months since John's been in post. And in fairness, we've not had the full team on board. So it's been quite relentless for them, but it's been important work. And the review has been good for us in terms of reflecting over the last couple of years, I guess. But also has highlighted some areas where we've done well, but also highlighted some areas where we can improve. So that's what we need to do now moving forward. But I'm happy to take any questions, but I hope members can see that there's been some progress.
Excellent. I just have one question, Jonathan, before I open it up. In terms of recruitment, you said these are the 4 positions that I felt absolutely essential. Do you see then being a further need for perhaps 1 or 2 more bodies in the room, or do you think that is sufficient?
When I did an options appraisal and took that through the governance structures with Programme Board that Wendy chairs and Joint Committee, and this was a kind of middle ground. So it wasn't if we had a fully fledged PMO, we could have a lot more posts, but I don't think we need that for what we're talking here. This was a middle ground, but there was 1 post I really wanted to have in here that we decided not to, and we would look at a second phase of recruitment if required once our PMO currently settles. But yeah, so
sorry, Jonathan.
It's a further senior support officer. So okay. Amanda Burns being one of those senior support officers, there's a lot of work to do, and what we can provide projects, and hopefully we can evidence this and start working with projects in a more meaningful way going forward. And that might create that demand and the acknowledgement that we actually need 2 people in those roles to make sure that we can spread. Otherwise, Amanda will be spread very thinly to establish things and continue monitoring and supporting. So so that would be that. But there are other posts I think we could take advantage of as a region moving forward. But I'm happy with what I've got right now. I think this is better than what we had. And not just I can see Wendy's hand, but this is to complement existing posts. So we have Greg Jones, who's on I think he's dialed in as well. Greg is the communications and marketing officer for manager for City Deal. We have a business engagement manager, Peter Austin, and we have Richard Arnold, who's the finance manager. So 8 of us are in total currently in the PMO.
Okay, Wendy.
Yeah, it was just to sort of give I guess the other side of that coin is the monitoring of the governance now moving forward will be key to assess whether the right support is in place for the PMO. So, you know, it'll be for yourselves and the Joint Committee to ensure that John and team get the required resource, and that will come down to the monitoring of the programme.
Thank you. Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, I got a couple of points. You actually mentioned about the, the business cases being, I'm not sure if they've been submitted now and so on, but going back to the original agreement between the Westminster government, the Welsh government, and the local authorities, has there been any change to that? Because you actually mentioned 9 projects here. What was the original agreement? Did it give us an open-ended book, or were there 9 projects identified at that stage, and have there been any changes since then? And also, and really, is there any room for deviation actually in the future? And with regards to the number of staff, it'd be good. I'd like to have some information with regards how big is the team, and what is the ongoing cost of this team, and is that actually monies coming out of the city deal budget at the end of the day?
Okay.
That's it. Yeah.
Jonathan?
I'll take it, and Wendy, please jump in as and when. So in terms of the city deal was approved in 2017, as we all know. In that, there were, in the heads of terms, there were outcome-related targets. They were things around jobs created, GVA. At that point, there were 11 projects identified. Last year, and it was prior to my time here, but I'm well versed on this. Last year, there was a change to the projects. Stuff around Centres for Excellence in Next Generation Services, CENGS, as people called it, Steel Science, Factories of the Future, and they kind of morphed a little bit, which then became the 9 projects. So Steel Science still exists. It's now called Switch. It's one of the projects within a program called Low Carbon, again led by Neath Talbot. Factories of the Future, for whatever term you want to use, I think the word, it was shelved, so it's not stopped, it's just for now it's put on hold. So that was decided that would effectively be shelved, and then CENGS remorphed into now what is called Low Carbon, taking aspects of different projects that existed before and created a program out of them. So that's kind of the process that happened. And again, it was about just over a year ago, I believe, that happened. So that is now reflected in our portfolio business case to reflect the 9 projects. But as a result of that, it hasn't changed anything in terms of our ambition, our ability to deliver, in terms of the outcomes associated with the heads of terms, etc. In fact, we've increased our GVA predictions and jobs created. The only thing in the portfolio business case that isn't as high as what it was previously was inward investment. But that will be one of our primary focuses going forward, is looking at how we bring in private investment through these projects, affordability plans effectively. So that's the first question. Wendy, do you want to add anything to that, or have I covered that?
No, it's fine. I've got nothing to add, John.
Thanks. The second question, Councillor, can you just remind me, just to make sure I cover each of the...
I think it was on the costings of the team.
Off the top of my head, I'll get those figures to you. I don't want to second guess something and then get it wrong. So the amount of money that it costs to run the PMO, there are 8 people, but there are also on costs, supporting things, marketing, whatever it might be. So I'll get you the full budget, and you can have a breakdown that's gone through our governance of Programme Board and Joint Committee. Our team costs fall well within that envelope that we had. The money, where it came from, because that was one part of the question. Each of the primary stakeholders, there's 8 of them, so 4 local authorities, 2 health boards, 2 universities, they contribute £50,000 per year each. And then in addition to that, for the first 5 years or so, because the first 5 years everybody debates as to when it started as opposed to where we are now, for the first 5 years, or 7 years in fact, we will take a 1.5% top slice contribution for running the portfolio. But that isn't just about the staff. As I said, it's on costs and the support and functions, including the Joint Scrutiny Committee. So to run things like legal support, monitoring officer support, Section 151, Joint Scrutiny, audit, all of those are part of those costs as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions on that part?
I can see Councillor Jones there, Chair.
No, he's already asked the question.
Oh, right, sorry. Oh, sorry.
My bottom.
This one.
Do you want to move on to the next part of the presentation?
Let me just bring this back up. Oops. So in terms of the risk register, there's two parts to this. There's a Swansea Bay City Deal risk register, and there's 13 risks that were identified and reported on in the attachment that you would have had. It was an Excel spreadsheet. I can share that in a second. But those 13 risks that were identified were red risks. A few of them now have gone to amber or green by the mitigations and the kind of moving time frame that we have with them. But what I wanted to flag with the Scrutiny Committee is what we're doing around risk management. So we currently have a risk register. It works. It's reported on a quarterly basis, etc. We also have a COVID impact assessment, which I'll give you a summary on. But it's making sure that we're mature in this process. So we will be updating our risk register. So that's one of Amanda's first things that she'll be working on. We held 2 risk management workshops with all our project leads and our PMO staff last week and the week before. That is to make sure that everybody's on the same page as to what risk is, how you manage it, how you define it, how you identify risks. That went down really well. It was very well engaged. So as a consequence of that, now we're looking at drafting a policy and a strategy around risk management. So the policy kind of is the hook that you hang all the things on in terms of what the definitions are. The management strategy is all around the hows, how we're going to do it. So redrafting the risk register and basically an overhaul of risks, making sure that everything's aligned and joined up, both at the portfolio and then down to project level is what we're currently working on. And we're trying to standardize things like risk registers. So a lot of the projects already have them, but they're not standardized in a kind of Swansea Bay City Deal format. So we're going to work with projects to do as much standardization as we can, and then move forward and report those on a quarterly basis. So we're doing all this in parallel with what we currently have for risk management. So if I just share with you, just as a visual aid, you have this in your packs, I assume. These are the 13 risks that were identified, and they're all categorized into things around development, implementation, operational, and financial. But what you'll find is that there are things like COVID impact. I've got a separate thing for that. In these risks, it identifies what the risk is, the consequence, a rating, and then the latest update with then what the current state of play is with that in terms of probability, impact, and then a status given to it. So I'm not going to go through every one of these. Anybody can pick out some of these, but COVID impact, a lot of it was around the more development stage, around slippage in delivery of program, business cases not being approved, the change in scope while you're developing a business case, delays, and that's delays both around the development of the business case and the approval of business cases. And then things around engagement with relevant stakeholders, particularly private industry that I just mentioned around affordability plans. And then there's a series of financial related ones, making sure that we get the funding in and that there's contributions from private sector, that we look at securing revenue funding, failure to achieve the full funding package, etc. EU FO funding was another aspect. So those are the 13 risks. What we've been working on and what Wendy kind of referred to earlier on about all the things that the team have been working on and the projects, local authorities, etc. It's making sure that we mitigate as many of these as we can. But some of the risks will always have a residual. It will always be a risk on the risk register. We're just putting things in place to make sure that we minimize things. So I'm not going to go through every control action there that exists, but if anybody would like to highlight anything here before I go on to the COVID impact assessment, because that's reflective of what some of these are here as well. So I'll pause there for a second.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question relates to the EU match funding risk, and I just want to ask, on a few of the projects, obviously there's risks associated with European funding.
Yeah.
We know the breakdown of the city deal. It's the well plotted out figures of 1.3 billion over 15 years. We're 3 years into that now. 241 million from UK, Welsh Government, 96 million from the public sector, and the largest chunk, 637 from the public sector. As I say, a couple of these projects, Pembroke Dock, there's WEFO funding, there's European regional funding being talked about. I just want to ask, what's the breakdown of European funding across all the projects, and in terms of what exposure is there now that we're out of the European Union? And with regards to any EU funding, where does it sit under those three categories? When the project we've just talked about, it's WAG and UK government, other public sector funding, and private sector. I don't want to guess. Is it that public sector funding that any EU funds comes under?
It would, yeah.
Yes, and just to reiterate, do we have figures for all these? Would the joint committee see this as a strategic programme risk? And finally, would the replacement UK internal market bill ensure these city deals succeeds and replace EU funding for the remainder of the timescale of the projects?
Okay. So to just make sure I don't miss any of the sub points that you raised. So WEFO offhand across the portfolio, this is one of the things we're doing in affordability plans. By the end of this month, we will have a financial breakdown, which will be the first financial quarterly monitoring across the portfolio. We will know where those funding streams are, not just for WEFO, but for all. So it's a next level down. So we know what the other public sector is, but it's breaking it down into the next area in terms of WEFO and other things. So offhand, I can't tell you what that number is. Within probably 2 weeks, the financial manager has just reminded all project managers to update their financials, so we should have those within days. We will report them to Programme Board, so I will get that back to you. In terms of the risk associated with it, there aren't that many projects with a requirement for WEFO in them, right? So the Neath Talbot low carbon is one, but we're proceeding at risk. So we're going into our eyes open with this in terms of Neath Talbot being the lead. But we know that this is a good, robust business case, so they will proceed at risk, knowing that. Pembroke Dock Marine is another one which has WEFO requirements. And again, we are on the cusp of getting PDM's been approved, and it's in delivery, but it's getting all the funding agreements and various other things in place to make sure. But it's a tight line with WEFO because now is the deadline to get everything up and running by Christmas, effectively. But we are working. This is one of the priorities for us to get all these things over the line and take a calculated risk. In terms of WEFO, it's on the radar for Joint Committee. It's on our risk register, so it's there as a strategic risk. Projects are managed locally, and they will report on them. And if there are any issues, and PDM has raised an issue recently, where to get the WEFO funding in and other things on one of the licenses, they might have to change something, but they've actually calculated that they could improve on what they have. So even though there's a risk and it might not deliver exactly what it's set out to do, it potentially can improve it even beyond what it was intended to do. So we are trying to monitor these things, but all the stuff around the risk management stuff will make sure that those things are escalated appropriately. I can see Wendy's hand. I don't know if you wanted to come in at that point, Wendy, or a prior point.
It was just to check, John. I think we would be able, for members' use, I think we've got the split of EU funding as opposed to the totality of the public pot. So we could probably circulate those to members so that they know how much of it's made up of European funding and how much of it is local government, Welsh government, so forth. Okay. So that might be useful. And just for Councillor Morgan's benefit, obviously we're waiting to hear what the UK Prosperity Fund may look like as well, in terms of themes, in terms of criteria. So I know that Welsh Government are trying very hard to get that information. So we're waiting as officers.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan, did I cover all your points? I know Wendy's point about the Shared Prosperity Fund is a very important one, and we are engaging on those fronts, but there's limited information available to us at the moment.
Yeah, no, thanks. I mean, obviously it's a high level question, isn't it? Because it's funding that's no longer going to be available. So I'm just wondering, because there's still 12 years to go, in the whole city deal. So if
Yeah.
there was anything at the start that was relying on EU funding, then I just wonder where this prosperity fund, as you just mentioned, is coming in, and whether those negotiations are taking place now, or it's just a case of sitting back and.
I think in the upfront business case,
So.
I think in the upfront business cases that have gone in, the WEFO funding is kind of locked in, if you like, at this early stage. Those are still being progressed as you would expect. What could come behind that, which could bolster and support the City Deal projects and programs, I think is very important, as you've highlighted. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions on this?
Sorry, was that to me? Or?
Well, yourself or any other member? No?
Fine, thank you.
Okay, if you want to carry on, John.
Yeah, I'll jump back into the slides. Again, it's only a couple of visual slides more than anything else. This is on the COVID impact assessment. So again, I wouldn't disaggregate the COVID impact assessment from risk management. They're of the same thing. This is a particular lens. I felt when I came into post, I was only in for 2 weeks before COVID happened or started. So I thought we'll do a COVID impact assessment and report in this over a period of time around the crisis management and the recovery phase, just to make sure we have a focus on it. So this year is just basically what it is. So it's to assess potential impact of COVID at the time crisis, now going into recovery, or we could have another crisis on hands if we go to a further lockdown. The City Deal is talked about in sense of stimulating the economy, but this is even more important about national and regional economy, particularly in terms of recovery. Right, so it could heighten the need for City Deal. It complements what else we have around risk management and other documentation. And generally what happens is that we're leaving it to the projects to mitigate, to identify risks, but we have clear identification routes to escalate things. And we've already instigated some of those. So anything around significant risks of project scope, outputs, timescales, stakeholder commitment, all of those things will be appropriately escalated through the PMO, Program Board, Joint Committee, etc. And what we've had, project managers have assessed in June and October. One of the updates in October actually didn't happen because PDM are in the thick of it to try and get their funding agreements up and running. So that was their priority. So that was the only one that didn't have an update. But broadly, their risks are the same for the COVID impact. And I've just got a summary, only 2 slides, but a summary just to present where the overview is, or where we are, and kind of key risks. So each risk was assessed, identified as high, medium, low, and we had 8 impact criteria. So scope and key objectives, the targets, timescales, reputation, if project failed to deliver, stakeholder partnership commitment, costs, procurement, and staff resourcing. Those are the 8 criteria. So each project then identified risks associated with those categories. They also looked at what mitigations they're putting in place and how long it will take to get those mitigations in place, so the kind of recovery time. So each one scored, and then impacts were given in terms of level of intervention. And that little table that I've got on the bottom of the screen summarizes by a project what intervention would be put in place. So the lowest scored one means that it's lower impact of COVID-19, so no intervention is required and you just do as normal. And then it goes all the way up to anything scoring over 100 was put into category A, where Joint Committee would commission a task and finish group. We haven't done that yet. The only things we've done as a PMO is a category B, and we did that on waterfront, but more because of the timing of things. And Hugh Mowbray, who's the project manager, has been doing brilliant stuff. And even since what we assessed initially to where he is now, the biggest concern for waterfront was getting tenancy. But I spoke to Hugh last week about this, and he said that even though they were concerned about it, it was a risk, and it still is, coming to them wanting to look at tenancy arrangements. The only issue with it is similar to a lot of the projects for tenancy particularly, is that often they want the thing to be built before they sign an agreement. So it's a difficult thing in that sense. But that's the process that we went through, and we've gone through this process twice. In terms of movement, because we've done an assessment in May and in October, quite a few of these are impact criteria, the 8 areas, quite a few of them have gone down. In other words, they've improved. But the main concerns are still around achievement of targets, reputational effect, and stakeholder and partner commitment. And then the more secondary concerns are around impact on scope and objectives. And again, every project has this detailed as to what they're going to do to try and overcome these issues. The last screen is more, it's not a very good visual thing on the screen in front of you, but this is a breakdown of all the different scorings and the guide to the scoring against the impact criteria and where they land in terms of the intervention. So that is effectively the COVID impact assessment that we report through the governance structures as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people. Okay, any questions on that?
Councillor Darren Price.
Thank you. Yeah, on that COVID risk assessment you just talked through there, obviously we were forwarded with a copy last week, and obviously the Swansea Waterfront was the highest scoring. I think it was 80 odd, wasn't it?
Yes.
So the screen you've just shared there now is the more recent assessment, the one that's been undertaken in October. So it's dropped by a matter of 5 points. 5 points, is it?
Yeah.
So okay. So in terms of the interventions that you've got there next to each category, there's talk of monitoring and support from the regional, from the program office.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question is, what form does that support take? You know, apart, I know you mentioned you had a chat with Hugh last week, but
oh no, it's much more formal than that, Councillor Price. So it's a good question.
That was my question.
Yeah, no, I should have explained myself a bit better with that point. So myself and a colleague from PMO, we set up a meeting with Waterfront, as in the project manager, and because Trinity St David is also a partner within that project, they were present as well. So there were probably about 6 of us in a digital meeting. Unfortunately, we couldn't physically meet, and we went through each of the risks and the assessed risk. We've got it all minuted as well. It's all documented, and we went through, well, what do you mean by this, and how are you going to mitigate against that? And we had a dialogue to get us through that kind of understanding, and then that kind of reassess some of the situation in terms of where they perceived they were and actually where they are. And then since then, we've had a follow-up in terms of update with Hugh Mowbray being the project manager to get an update in terms of what you're doing in terms of mitigation and where are you in terms of, you will always have residual risks with this, and they are risks, they're not issues, because there's potential with them as opposed to they're happening. So we will continue to monitor those with all of the project managers, and anybody who falls into that intervention, I think it was B, we will do a similar workshop with them in the same process. Does that answer your question, Councillor?
Yeah. I think, can I just pick up on one other point as well, Rob, quickly?
Yeah, carry on.
Yeah, you mentioned the standardisation really in terms of the risk assessments generally, and I'm assuming that extends to the COVID one as well, because I think just looking at it, it's a one-pager, but you can sense there's a difference maybe in terms of content. You know, I mean, working with contractors as a mitigation, you know, doesn't tell me much as a scrutineer. You know, that's the point to make.
So it's all standardized. You can have that report as well. There's no issue with that. So all the stuff in terms of the risk assessment and the COVID impact assessment will be one thing at some point. So it will all be one list of risks and issues and opportunities. But right now it was a kind of point in time thing, but all the same information is held within spreadsheets for the COVID impact assessment. So, and again, that can be shared along with the risk register in the future, if you would like that.
Do you want to come back in at all, Darren?
No, happy, Jack.
Excellent, diolch yn fawr. Councillor Tony Barron.
Thank you, Chair. Could I ask about stakeholder and partner commitment, which is the one area where the risk is rising as opposed to falling. Could you elaborate a little more about that as to why you see that risk increasing rather than decreasing? And in particular, to what extent are you seeing private sector funding moving away? To what extent do you fear that private sector companies are in financial difficulties and in danger, all of which would impact upon the deliverability on time? And finally, would you say something about the non-private sector stakeholders, whether you've got there?
Okay. I'll start with the last one because I can remember it exactly. So non-private sector stakeholder commitment. No, I would see, since I've come into post, I would say it's the opposite. I think that people are committed. We're seeing good progress being made on business cases, on implementation. We're doing things around a kind of control mechanism around funding agreements. We're not there yet, but we're getting there in terms of agreements of delivery of outputs and outcomes and engagement with that process. So I would say from a regional perspective, we have good engagement. There will be 2 local authorities in the process now of recruiting 2 new chief execs. So obviously that will change things. There's uncertainty associated with those, but I wouldn't foresee that being a major risk. I think it's something that we just have to have a watching brief on, particularly for the regional-based projects. Wendy, would you want to add anything to that from your perspective, because you work with a lot of the partners in that sense?
I think only to add, I think in times like we're in at the moment, I've seen a more coming together than anything else. So some of these projects are so vitally important to some of the recovery mechanisms. So I think everybody has the same end aim for this. So everybody wants them to work. So I've not seen a lacking of interest from partners, be it the voluntary sector or public sector.
And there are things, Councillor, where they are, sorry, Tony, I'm not sure if you're a councillor.
Tony. Yes, I am.
There's other projects that people are also referring to. They may not be part of City Deal, but if you take transportation or metro or whatever it might be called, there are other regional things that we're looking at as well to bolster what we currently have in terms of commitment on a regional basis, which are great. So I can't remember if it was question 1 or 2, but the public sector, why is stakeholder engagement increasing? I think it's just the uncertainty, and COVID is a lens. This risk exists anyway, right? If on the risk register that you've had, this is probably scattered across a few of the risks. So I think it's always a difficulty where some of the projects that we have is difficult to get buy-in up front partly because of procurement. We have to go through appropriate procurement channels. Others might be, there's uncertainty, even if you take, say, the waterfront, with an operator being around the arts and the kind of arena-based facilities, ATG. There will be uncertainty around those because of the global crisis, but they're still bought into it. They're still there. This is a risk that we have to make sure that ATG still sees us as a priority, and we will still continue to engage with them and make sure that they're committed and bought in. But this is about risk. So with the global pandemic and everything associated with that, we know how much that sector's been hit, and we want to try and support it. But again, we even talked about it in a team meeting today, where we will look at the creative industries, because that links to Aragon, and with the arena with ATG, and we're going to come across all the different projects and look, is there something we can do regionally, City Deal related, where we can support that industry? You know, is there something around skills or digital that we can draw in the other projects to look at how we can mitigate some of those risks and maybe create something different or new, or all within the same scope of the projects? But again, trying to bring those together. And that was only talked about just an hour or 2 ago before this meeting. So we continue to do those. But the private sector, and I think any City Deal will be the same, that's the hardest money to get. You know, the City Deal funding, you know, it's sort of ring fenced as long as we put a robust business case in and we can evidence that they're affordable and strategic and managed and all those different things. And the public sector, being the 8 organisations who make up the City Deal, they're all bought into this. You know, they want these things to happen, whether it's energy, wellness, digital, whatever it is. They're all bought into this. It's the private sector, which is always the hardest thing to get. And in terms of the funding, the biggest funded external funding for private is the homes as power stations. And again, through supply chain and other things associated with that, it's making sure that we give that its best chance of success by supporting it and making sure that we plan now for future inward investment for that project. I think it accounted for something like 300 million. So again, there's a lot of uncertainty down the line with that project, and that's why the risk is higher, because things have to happen here for it to cascade down to that supply chain down the line in a few years' time. Has that answered that part of the question, Councillor? There was a middle question as well, wasn't there?
I think to some extent, the problem that one sees obviously is that many private sector companies that you're going to be relying upon are seriously affected by COVID.
Yeah.
Virtually all of them, if they had any borrowings at all before the lockdown, will be in breach of their covenants. And I'm not talking about CBILS or other government-sponsored loans, but the normal commercial money that they have been relying upon in the past, almost certainly they're in breach of covenant, and therefore their financial capability is severely impaired, and that obviously has a knock-on to the projects.
Yeah, and these are the things that any partners that we're working with, because that could extend to other organisations like the universities and other things as well. So we are keeping a watching brief on things. I'm not getting any soundings that is a major concern today, but again, it is a risk that we have on our radar to make sure that we are working with as many companies. But again, the broad spectrum of companies, there could be huge opportunities within our region, and as a consequence of COVID for some of these areas as well. So even with risks come the opportunities, and we want to try and identify and take those forward. And that everybody sees risk management as a more, what are you going to do to fix a problem? Well, actually, risk management there are opportunities that we could capitalize on, and we could improve things as a consequence of that. And I know that sounds all nice and rosy, and I'm not blinkered. You know, I get that there's the double-edged sword with these things. But we will consider both the opportunities and the risks associated with these. But nothing has come to light that I'm aware of to make me worry about how you just described it, Councillor, in terms of covenants with things. But some of the projects aren't there yet. So again, we have to keep that watching brief. And you asking these questions helps me put things into a perspective, and I can take these back to the projects as well to ask them the same question. So that helps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Llywelyn.
Diolch Cadeirydd. Just picking up really on that very interesting discussion between Tony and Jonathan. Perhaps two points. First of all, Jonathan referred to the homes for power stations, which is part of the project actually led by my local authority in Neath for Talbot, and the importance of being able to capture that private sector investment there, either through the supply chain or as part of the construction processes. Now, obviously, that project does actually form a very high percentage of the total value of the city deal.
Yeah.
Now, currently, unfortunately, I can't retrieve my papers at the moment, but from memory, from the briefings that we had in advance, you know, I mean, it's still at the stage of waiting various parts of approval, and until that approval is received, project coordinators and project teams can't be appointed. So I just like a comment there. It's not directly COVID related, but taking Tony's point, you know, the private sector are taking a hit really from the COVID situation. Just have a comment from you, Jonathan, on how you see the current time scale on that, given the considerable project that needs to be delivered if it's going to meet that percentage part of the overall programme.
Yeah.
And then the other part, which is going to be my original question, was about the university-led project. Identified specifically that securing input from the private sector was one of their risks. Now, we haven't been able to date, to some frustration, been able to meet with the Vice-Chancellor. We're hoping that will take place in our next meeting. So obviously we, do want some assurances from the progress that the university is making, particularly, given the history that we don't need to dwell on this afternoon.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we don't know who the private sector partners are. Whether they're actual existing private sector partners or potential private sector partners. So I'd like a comment from you there as well as to how significant that risk is to the university-led project if we haven't been able, or if the university then hasn't been able to tie down private sector investment or participation at this stage.
So, Councillor, can I confirm, is it campuses you're referring to there, or is it Switch, which is part of the low carbon?
No, it was the campus one, because
the campus. Okay, that's fine.
So no longer has the same level of involvement from the university. So
yeah. So in term, I've had a few engagements now with the university at a strategic and at a project board level, and that's one of the things I've also fed back to them in terms of at least identifying where the potential could be. So they have that in the pipeline. That is what they're focusing on right now. So there are people like Gareth Stratton, who heads up sports science, because sports science is now part of it. They're looking at that kind of who would the partners be, or the potential partners, because again, there's a bit of a chicken and egg with these. So I don't think they've identified exactly the funding streams in terms of private sector. So I think they're in probably the same sort of position as where you identify them to be, but they have it on their radar. They are working towards that. In terms of the other part of it, then, in terms of they're basing their model on the Institute of Life Sciences. So that was Singleton, Swansea University Hospital based, where they would have tenancy based innovation, R&D, linking clinicians with students, etc. They would have a similar model to that as well for that part of it. So again, they are yet to identify and articulate who those are. But and this isn't just about campuses, this is across the board. Any project that this is all about the affordability plans. How committed are private investors up front when a business case, bearing in mind a business case would be in an outline kind of state, not in a fully procured state by the time it gets an investment decision. But we as a PMO would monitor that and make sure that they're on track for what they're doing, because the whole point of the portfolio and programs is that you make decisions to invest or not, even though the thing might be approved. That's how it all should work, the mechanics of things that work in. So to answer your question in short, I don't think they've progressed much further than what you're talking about, but they have that as their highest priority. I was in a short list, they went from a long list to a short list options appraisal, and that was one of the key things that were identified as part of that, and I was in that workshop with them doing that. So again, I can take that back and I can ask for an update so that we can bring it back to the next scrutiny committee, or we can do it electronically as an update. The second question you asked about homes as power stations, and again, this is a common thing for me, for not just homes as power stations, but multiple projects. If we wait for an investment decision by UK Welsh Government and we get things over the line, there could be another 3 to 6 months for recruitment. That's what happened with me with a PMO. It's what's happened in projects gone past. So what I want to try and do is shorten that gap between an investment decision and recruitment of staff. And sometimes we can proceed at risk, but I think with certain projects we can actually proceed at very little risk, yet we can get things up and running quickly. So the question of where are we with it? It's gone through regional scrutiny and review, and it's been approved. So joint committee have approved it. It's gone through an external stage gate review. So that is an external team coming in, looking in on it, providing it's not an audit, it's about a moving forward thing, and they provide recommendations to improve the business case, which they've now done, or they're in the process of doing. So Nicola, who's the SRO, and with Lisa Willis, they are virtually there. So by the end of this month, they should have a finalised business case that can go to Welsh and UK government for approval. And the updates, because it doesn't have to go through our regional approval, it will be updated through programme board to say what the difference was with what we had to what it is now after the external review. And then it's over to Welsh and UK government, hopefully for approval within the next month or two after submission.
Can I bring in Wendy quickly?
Okay.
Yeah, just before I go, Chair, and referring to Councillor Alan Llewellyn's comment, I just wonder, as you have two higher education providers as part of the city deal, it may be an opportunity for members to invite the other HE provider along the same time as Swansea University, so you could have just a general discussion then around the HE sector. Just a suggestion, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you for attending the meeting.
Thank you, Paul.
Jones. Jeff Jones.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you then. Yeah, I was going to bring up the same theme as Tony Barron and the private sector, but it's not only the private sector that's been affected by COVID. Local authorities are also affected as well. They're not sure if they're actually going to meet the costs at the end of the day. So you've actually made a comment earlier that you would do everything to help and so on. So what sort of input would you have if a local authority is now finding that it can't afford going forward with the project? I assume they've got to go forward anyway,
Well, yeah, on most, not all of them, but most of them, they are pretty locked in. So unless something significant, I've asked recently, are we still committed? Are we still going forward with these projects? And I've been told yes, but both at Welsh government perspective and from a regional perspective. Any indications that I get which would imply or heighten the risk that a local authority lead isn't as committed or can't afford or whatever, then that would be a red risk straight away, and we would do that intervention that I referred to in joint committee. Yeah. So there's that aspect of things. I'm not aware of anything that has been to that point. But again, it's all about timing, isn't it? What happens next week or next month, who knows? But as it is now, in the current state of play, I think we're in a good place to continue and proceed with these. I call them affordability plans, but they can be called wherever they want. But what I would like to start doing with the portfolio and the teams is as in project teams, is make sure that we have these affordability plans that, again, they're living documents, and it doesn't matter if it's private, public sector, or whatever it is. Just make sure that we can afford the financial requirements for these projects. And it's not just about the build; it's about beyond that as well.
Yeah.
So that would be the mechanism, if you like, to do that. So the risk register, the affordability plans, etc.
Yeah, and I think you've identified as well that the private investment is perhaps the hardest to actually get, and perhaps the biggest risk, and so on as well. And I know the Holmes's power station is over £500 million, I think, at the end of the day, going down the line. At the present time, we've got no commitment as such from the private sector, or have we got any firm commitment on any of these projects that they will actually come up with the money? With regards to Swansea, I think they found it very difficult, or probably impossible, to actually attract private funding. Hence, they've had to put all the money in themselves, which perhaps it rings alarm bells with me with regards to the private sector investment. So what sort of commitment have we had from the private sector to the present time?
So in a nutshell, very little. So PDM, Pembroke Dock Marine, has had private sector commitment to the point where it is happening. So that's in. Even things like, Welsh Government asked me exactly the same question, Councillor, and my response was, there's different financial models for each of the projects, and some of them use more than one financial model. So you would have, and this is how I responded to that, you would have tenancy arrangements. So basically you build a building and tenants would reside in it. Eregan is a case in point of that. They currently have, and again, I haven't checked the numbers in the last 2 weeks, but when they reported on it just over a month or so ago, they had a 100% occupancy rate. Right, so that's your tenancy kind of financial model, your revenue income from that sort of stream. Then you might have your more anchor tenants or operators. So ATG being a case in point, Pentra Owl, which they can't do anything about it now because it has to be procured, and they have to be careful with procurement guidelines. But basically, you potentially could run an operator to run the services, and that again is a financial model. You could do it through kind of R&D related things. So again, Pentra Owl, if you had what they call a tier 1 R&D type company, whoever it might be, you can name any of them you want, but again, they can't do that yet. Same for campuses, you might have an R&D tier 1 partner involved in the initiative. So there are multiple different financial models and approaches to doing things, but some of them could be run by a university or local authority. So that would be their kind of financial model. Does that make sense in that sense? In different projects have, and some have all of those things I just said to make them.
Yeah, definitely so, really. But it still brings me back to, private companies have got financial models. They don't see the benefits of actually, shall we say, building the arena and so on. They've actually left it to the local authority, which to me, it doesn't sound a solid business case then. We have to build, we bear all the cost, and they take all the profit, shall we say, at the end of the day, or less of the risk.
Yeah. I get that, but again, it's the revenue, the all the stuff associated with lifting the GVA and creating the jobs within the region that we could benefit from, and I think that's important. But again, Pembroke Dock Marine isn't the same model. Pembroke Dock Marine has a lot more commitment and buy-in from private companies. So different projects for different reasons have different models, and I wouldn't say any are bad. In fact, I've reviewed all of them now, and I think they all have a value, and I think they're all good projects. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cynghorydd Price.
Thanks. Just picking up on the funding element and looking at the local government contributions on page 61 of the agenda, it outlines and talks about the need to identify and agree the local authority borrowing requirements for the regional projects.
Yeah.
And it states there that they're looking at sort of Q3 2020 as a time frame. I'm just wondering, could you outline really where we are with that, and maybe give us an indication in terms of the underlying principles and methodology in terms of getting to that point, because obviously each authority will be coming at it from different perspectives, and so I'm just wondering how are you getting on to that job?
It's a typical city deal answer. There's no one straightforward answer, but I'll do my best. I wish I had my finance manager, because he would do a better articulation than me. So we'll follow that up with a correct wording, but basically because of the way that City Deal is funded, is a 15-year portfolio. We have almost a straight line drawdown of funds. It's 18 million, then it reduces to 15, but over 15 years we have that drawdown. The approval doesn't follow a project approval. The drawdown, so the 18 million down to 15 million over the 15 years, that just has a straight line. And in that process, in that timeline, we will approve projects. Right. So what happens then is that local authorities have to borrow money up front. They build their thing, they get their license, they do whatever it is within the first 5 to 7 years, if that, and they do their infrastructure, and then they get their money back over the kind of 15-year period. So the borrowing arrangements, this is why we had a control mechanism called funding agreements put in place. The borrowing arrangements are between the accountable body and the local authority, and then the local authority to the lead deliverers. And in those funding agreements, they're standardized to a point, but not fully standardized, those are borrowing arrangements that are agreed between the partners. So every I can't give you a standard answer because each project is different. So we're working with Pembroke Dock Marine today, right in their funding agreements. Theirs would be probably different than what Eregan would be for Carmarthenshire to Trinity. But effectively, the agreement between the deliverers and the lead authority and how they borrow that money, because that's effectively what they have to do, is borrow the money up front to build a building and then get their money back over the 15-year period. So so most local authorities are taking that hit to borrow that money, but not every.
Yeah, sorry, I was referring to the regional, the cross-region project, so the skills, for example.
Yeah, so skills, that isn't that mature yet, councillor. So the funding agreements haven't been written, the business case hasn't been developed to a point of maturity. So those are to be determined. Skills is probably the one that is the least mature in terms of business case. So most of the other ones have documented how they're going to do the borrowing. Homes as power stations, this is part of this month. We met with the finance manager and the project lead last week, and with Hugh Evans for finance to start the ball rolling and how those funding agreements will be written and the borrowing, and the same for digital. So I'm not answering your question very well, but we are working on it. We don't have those definitive answers. Those are part of the funding agreements, and the 3 regional ones aren't there yet. Okay. So what that might be a good action to do is detail what those would look like moving forward, so we can answer that question for you. I know I haven't answered it, but yeah, I'll take that as a...
So essentially, there's some slippage really in terms of that action then, because obviously Q3 2020, we're not going to be in a position to divvy up the borrowing, because we haven't actually agreed the business case yet, have we?
Well, for the ones that are there, so Pembroke Dock Marine, I said they're on the cusp of it. So the funding agreements are in place, right? They're written, but they have to be populated for each project. So they are they're with the lawyers for Oregon, they're with the lawyers for PDM, and Waterfront asked for a tweak last week. So all of those 3 are almost there, but they're not the regional projects that you referred to. The other ones, they're not at that stage. But what I've asked everyone to do, and anybody who will listen, including yourselves now, I've asked them to get these funding agreements in place before we get a funding approval, because otherwise it could kick us into the long grass for 2 to 3 months to get all those things and the mechanisms and everything sorted, which again can delay things. So we're on track. We are working on it. We just don't have it for all projects in that sense. But what I'll do, I'll go back and I'll ask my finance manager to write a kind of paragraph summary. We have them in the portfolio business case. We have them in the business cases that are being submitted. Homes as power stations, low carbon are being tweaked as we speak, because we started that last week with my finance manager. But we'll get some narrative to confirm where we are and what we plan to do going forward. And hopefully when I speak to you next, we'll have it all at least better articulated.
Thank you.
Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jonathan. Again, I'm just going to ask sort of the highest of high-level questions. If you Google Swansea Bay City deal, the same figures come back at you: 1.3 billion over 15 years. What's it going to create? Around 9,000 jobs. And you mentioned yourself GVA for that 1.3 billion is going to be 1.8 billion or something of that nature. Where are we in those 2 critical figures, the 9,000 jobs and the GVA?
I can give you, well, so they are updated. I was hoping I could seamlessly get something. So let me do it off the top of my head rather than dig out a presentation. So jobs created have gone up 2% in our portfolio. So that is basically 9,400, and it's just now something like 9,000, whatever, 2% above that. GVA has actually gone up significantly. So GVA was 1.8 billion. That's gone up something like 33% or 32%, whatever the number ended up being. But we have significantly jumped in that one. The one, as I said earlier on, the one that isn't so great, and we are keeping a watching brief, these affordability plans, was based around inward investment. So I've found a slide because this is, again, visually important. Let me show you. This is what I presented to Welsh Government as part of our AOR process. This was only a few weeks ago. What am I doing? Can you all see that? Sorry, just there we go.
That's good.
So what this is basically the breakdown of the 9 projects, the investment being the 3 funding streams: city deal, public, private, and then the total. So what the 1.3 billion GVA at 1.3 billion investment currently is 1.157 billion. So that's down, and the reason why it's down is the amount of private investment. We are down on that. as to what we said we would be. So is 637 million, I think it was in the first. We're down to about 590 million. So this is part of the affordability plans and everything else associated with that. The GVA and the net jobs are the next two columns. So 1.8 billion GVA is what you quoted, and it's now 2.384. And the jobs created went from I think it was 9,400 and something to 9,728. So arguably, and this is a good story, I suppose, in some senses, we're doing more with less. But
these are still projections, aren't they?
These are all everything that we have, and this is a moving feast. If I presented this to you in 6 months' time, those numbers might be different.
When will we get actuals?
Well, it's until this is part of the issue. So the actuals for impact, you won't actually get that until 15 years' time, because that is the beyond the delivery of a physical thing, infrastructure, license, whatever it might be, and then the impact related to the series of projects that you have in front of you here. That is what those two end points are. As
like at Reagan, for example, I mean, you know, the building was up and running. You know, is there nothing then being done to try and?
So the monitoring.
What's being done?
Yeah. So the monitoring. Yeah, it's an important point. So the monitoring side of things for Reagan, as an example, they would report how many businesses have been occupancy. They would talk about how many engagements they've had with academia. They would talk about how many jobs have been created as a consequence, and they are monitoring on those outputs associated with the building. But these monitoring will cover outputs, outcomes, and impact. And this is part of the issue with the city deal, is that the impact of the GVA net jobs over a 15-year period. But we will monitor as we go through. But there's only 3 projects over the line. One is in construction, one is occupied, and the other one has just been approved. All the other 6 are going through business case development or approval. But this is one of for me, this is the biggest priority for us going forward, is how and what we do to monitor and provide that information update.
Because I'd be surprised if either governments or private business or anybody really would ask for some sort of breakdown at some stage. I appreciate, you know, the life of the project is 15 years. I totally appreciate that. But, you know, as these things, as some of them get ticked off, you know, and become live, then, you know, I'd certainly be expecting some sort of figures to be coming back.
Yeah, so they will through quarterly monitoring. So, so what will happen in? I was hoping to get it for next program board, but maybe the program board after. There will be quarterly updates, and those quarterly updates will entail risk, financials, output deliverables, and activity. Those are the 4 components of a quarterly monitoring. So the outputs that you're referring to, Councillor, are part of that, but also the financials in terms of affordability plans and where the money's coming from and what we spend be part of it too, along with risk.
Well, my natural question then was, I'm assuming, Chair, that that's something that's going to come to us naturally after the joint committee is met.
Yeah, I think we'll ensure that officers pass that information on.
And what I'd like from joint scrutiny as well, if possible, is you may help us shape what that looks like as well. You know, are there requirements that you would like to see? And I think we've covered a lot of those off today in the conversation, so we can feed those into that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll do one more round. First, Councillor Jan Curtis, then Jeff Jones, and then Tony Barron. So, Jan.
Sorry, Rob, I put it up by mistake. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Jeff.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, my ignorance. The last slide you actually put up was, you know, GVA figures and jobs and so on over the 15 years.
Yeah.
How do you actually calculate what those figures are? And, you know, reading through the papers, there's been reference to some of these figures actually include construction jobs.
Yes.
Do those figures include construction jobs? Well, I'm going back. How do you calculate those figures? How do you come?
So every business case, so they do include construction related jobs as well. So the figures that you have in front of you, or had in front of you, how they're calculated. So we use economists, every business case, and predominantly they're external consultants effectively, and they provide the economic appraisal, but also financial support for those, because a project manager wouldn't necessarily be an economist. They wouldn't know how to calculate GVA and all those sort of things. So that's why we use external advisors to do that. And what we've had it more recently, so there's a gentleman in Welsh Government who's an economist, and he's working with us to standardize those economic appraisals to make sure that we understand the methodology and that they're robust and they're aligned to the Green Book. So that's what we're working on. So one of the recommendations that will come forward from Welsh Government is to work with us to standardise those things. And again, this is, I think this is a regional learning curve for us, because I think we will have to do more of this going forward for other funding streams. And the more robust we have these, and the better knowledge we have in relation to them, the better it is for our region.
Thank you.
There is a side point to that as well, Councillor. There's we have a city region strategy, an economic region strategy, and a company called SQW did economic appraisals back in 2013. They updated it in 2016, but that was on the region in terms of productivity, people in jobs, GVA, people in high paid jobs, and various things around economic appraisals. So again, I want to try and tap into those from the city deal to make sure that we're joined up with the city region working as well as the city deal.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to follow on from the last two councillors and their questions about GVA. You've announced an increase of 1/3 in the GVA, but you've also acknowledged that the private sector is in trouble. They're not necessarily going to take up leases and occupancy at the rate that perhaps had been originally thought. Could you give us some idea of why you believe the GVA is going to increase so much, when in actual fact you said the amount of private sector money going in is going down? Mm-hmm. And secondly, on the jobs front, which is crucial in this time of great uncertainty and rising unemployment, at the moment we are covered by EU procurement laws. Obviously, at the end of this year, things change significantly. To what extent do you see any possibility of changes in the procurement profiles so that we can ensure that more of the jobs that are created by this investment actually benefit people in West Wales and in Wales in general?
Okay. The latter question, to be perfectly honest, I'm not a procurement expert, so I don't believe I could answer that question. We have Swansea Bay City Deal procurement principles. They're currently awaiting joint committee approval. But in terms of the question around why is GVA gone up yet private sector investment has gone down, what I didn't say, the commitment to companies is a risk. It's not happening. So what we are doing, we're keeping a watching brief on it. The whole GVA impact is basically based on better economic appraisals than what we've had in the past. And these are arguably, because they're all estimates, they're all appraisals, they're all future type estimations, but those are based on more robust economic appraisals. So you probably find that it might have always been that, it just wasn't appraised in a robust way. So that's probably why there's a deviation in relation to GVA. In terms of the difference, because we did that reprofile that I referred to, where the Sengs factories of the future, that is where we took a bit of a hit with the inward investment from industry, private sector. So it wasn't that anything's dramatically changed and people aren't as committed, or we don't believe we can deliver. It was Factories of the Future had quite a lot of inward investment from industry, and that is no longer on the cards. So that's one of the reasons why that dropped, and Sengs had a lot more. But again, through low carbon and homes as power stations, we now have more robust business cases, and we could even see, as a result of the external review, those numbers changing again for the better in terms of inward investment. So one of the projects within low carbon was it's now called Switch, but it's in relation to steel. And that now has a more robust economic appraisal, and they have identified where they would get leverage from in terms of private sector and other public sector funds, R&D related stuff. So I can't say because I don't know yet, it's still in the development stage, but I could see that being increased in terms of value, which will get us back to where we said we would be. But even when City Deal was signed in 2017, that was an economic appraisal at that point in time, which came up with those numbers. So it's not to say that those were the correct numbers, if you like. We know more now than what we did then, and we're trying to make these more appropriate and robust.
Mr. Chairman, all economic forecasts, and I speak as someone who's made his living as an economist for many years, all economic forecasts are determined by what assumptions you make.
Yes.
But to make such a huge jump in the GVA, you've obviously changed the assumptions. What I'm asking is, what assumptions have you changed?
I don't believe I've made any change to assumptions. From a project perspective, I genuinely think that it's down to the robustness of the economic appraisals. I genuinely think that.
Well, let's hope that they're correct.
Okay, but why don't we, to test that, I will go back and I will ask projects, have assumptions changed? Because I think, again, Councillor, it's a good challenge to have. And I would like to have that answer as well, as I mentioned earlier on. So I think it's a good question that we can go back and ask that. Because we will also be tested at Welsh and UK government at that level to make sure that those assumptions that you're referring to and that we haven't made different assumptions or that we haven't taken something into account. So I will go back and challenge on that as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question on page 16, again, looking at jobs and net jobs. Have you got a breakdown of what percentage of the jobs are permanent and what are temporary? Obviously, it's more important to have permanent long-term jobs and somebody signing up for a couple of months to do some work and then going, because this is all about creating jobs and prosperity for the region, and obviously long-term jobs and brings prosperity for people and ability for people to spend money.
Yeah, so that would have been brilliant if I inherited that, Councillor, but no, to answer your question, we need to define them without doubt. I've questioned that since I've been in post, and what we don't want to go down the route of is, if any of you are familiar with WEFO and the way that WEFO monitor and evaluate things, I wouldn't want to create a cottage industry in doing that, right? Because I need another team, right? So if you ask for requirements in terms of team, I will need more people to do that type of thing. For the purposes of what we're doing, I don't think we need that, but we do need to define what all I've had in terms of definition is a high skilled job, because that will increase GVA. That's the point of the high skilled, as opposed to any job. It's not to say that any job isn't good, because that will increase productivity, and that's a good thing. But in terms of GVA's high skilled jobs, and that's the only definition that has been said. In high value sectors is another part that has been raised. So things around manufacturing or energy, those are the identified areas. Digital is another one as an example. I can see Councillor Barron, you jumped in there. You probably have a view on this, or a strong view on this. Do you want to jump in? Oh, you don't. You can jump in there if you want, but shall I?
So carry on.
Yeah. So these are some of the things. So what we have in terms of impact I will be working with a company. I mentioned SQW as an example. They will do economic appraisals, and what I would foresee is that you have City Deal in our region, and you have, if you continued without City Deal, as opposed to continuing with City Deal, what's the difference in terms of the economic impact? And I'm not an economist, that's logically the process. And how you disaggregate the City Deal projects from everything else happening is very difficult. But if we can model it based on what I just said, I think that's the difference, is what we can try and attribute towards City Deal, and high-level jobs would be defined through that process.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barron, did you want to come in with a quick point? Are you on mute?
Thank you, Chair. Now, it's exceedingly difficult, obviously, to determine what the specific impact is. And again, I would agree with your approach that you need to have a look at what it is with the deal and what it is without the deal. And to do that, you need to make heroic assumptions. I think the basic approach has to be on looking specifically at the projects you've got and build up from the ground up. Otherwise, you end up spending an awful lot of time on economic appraisals. You make some very high skilled jobs paying economists, but you don't get very much in terms of the rest of the economy.
See, Councillor Barron shouldn't have told me he's an economist. I may pick his brains now, but I'm not right now, but in the future. Yeah.
Thank you very much for them contributions. If I could ask 3 quick questions. In terms of the progress of the projects, it seems like the projects are based on like local matters tend to be the ones that are progressing quicker. That you talk about skills as one example of the slowness and the nature of developing the projects. So the first question is, why is that?
So I wouldn't say it's quite reflective of all of it. So there's 3 truly regional projects. So digital, HAPS, homes as power stations, and skills. I would only put skills in that category. So digital is currently going through regional approval. It's been defined. I've worked a lot with a project manager. He's very good. So he's been recruited. So Gareth Jones as project manager. He's done a lot of legwork, and he's utilized a consultancy company called Cube. So it's the business case, the outline business case is pretty much there. It's got a few tweaks to make, and it's going through an external stage gate review next week. So that is pretty much there. Hopefully joint committee can approve that in November. That's what we're hoping for. And then that can go to Welsh UK government for approval. I can't say how long they will take to get it approved, but as close to Christmas as we can, that would be great. Homes as power stations, I would put in a similar category, but they're more advanced in that they've gone through the regional approval, they've gone through the external stage gate review, they're incorporated most of the changes. By the end of this month, that will also be ready for Welsh and UK government approval. So skills then is the third one, Councillor, that you referred to. So that one, we don't have somebody who is working on that is currently working on other things as well. So Jane leads the European office for Carmarthenshire. She oversees the skills learning partnership for the region. So Jane has also been caught up with COVID in terms of the recovery type stuff because she's employed by Carmarthenshire Council. So that has had delays for multiple reasons, but Jane is now not far off working on it full time, and we will get support. He doesn't even know he's actually sitting in the office behind me. It's his first day, but Ian Williams, who's just started with us, Ian will be working on skills to get that accelerated as quickly as we can with Jane, to give her the support that she needs to get that moving. So I wouldn't say it's reflective of local as opposed to regional. I think there was one project that I would have put in that category, but that one project we can accelerate probably a lot quicker. And we just put a tender out for economic appraisal for the skills and talent programme. So the economic appraisal will take place within the next month or so.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. The second question is, obviously, at the beginning of the kind of concept of the city deal, there was a lot of discussion between I think largely economists. And there was a statement made by someone in Cardiff that there appeared to be an over-reliance on a tenancy-based model. Around 50% of the total projects left have some element of tenancy and need for people to come and, take refuge in our buildings. But do you think that coronavirus has kind of shown that to be true? That perhaps, when we were developing the concept of the city deal, there perhaps less of a kind of reliance on building buildings and hoping people will come. Do you think, in hindsight, that because in some ways a lot of the projects haven't got to the stage where they've broken ground?
No.
So if we are possibly thinking that there is an over-reliance in tenancy, could we not start changing some of the projects right now?
So 2 weeks ago in a team meeting, we talked about this exact problem or potential issue. And what we've there's a guy, I've forgotten his name, from Welsh Government who is looking at this in terms of analysis, and we're going to invite him in to talk about the potential and things like that. If you ask my personal opinion on it, we're talking about a 15-year portfolio. We're talking about a very low base in terms of infrastructure for our region. I think that we need these infrastructure projects. Is there an over-reliance? Because I think you did say over-reliance on tenancy. I don't think it's over-reliance. A lot of them rely on tenancy because they don't have, if you take Neath Talbot alone, I worked for Neath Talbot 12 years ago for local authority, and they were talking about having incubation space and business space 12 years ago. And 12 years on, this project could actually give what they need. They know they've got the evidence to suggest that they need this space. All right, so I don't think it's an over-reliance. I think we have to create infrastructure, but City Deal isn't the only thing that should be creating infrastructure. There should be lots of other things. And if we create this kind of pipeline of inward investment and wherever else, we probably need more.
It's interesting. One of the projects in particular, the Pentrewell model, part of that is business units. Now, just a stone's throw away from the proposed area are a number of business units that are completely vacant, and they find it very, very difficult to kind of bring companies in. So it may be the attraction of the city deal itself that brings companies in, but it may be the case. And I hope that it is very successful. Yeah. But it's not a build it and they will come kind of mantra. I hope.
I cringe every time I hear that. But Pentrewell as a case in point. So that the whole point of that business incubation space is not businesses in isolation. They will have academia. They will have the kind of aftercare in terms of a population of patients and whatever else, and the leisure facilities all co-located. And I think that's the key thing. It's the co-location of those things. And you may find, Councillor, that if this is as successful as it is hoped to be, those business units that you said are across the road may actually be filled because of this investment. Yeah. So, and I can't second guess that, but I would imagine if it does what it's meant to do. But this comes back to those conversations about tenancy and about the kind of tier one anchor companies that could also reside in there.
And I guess the last question I have, there's been a lot of talk about the input of businesses and the kind of their commitment to the projects. What would you like to see from businesses to reassure you? Is it a letter from the CEO to say, yes, we're committed to this project? Is it some formal
signed MOUs and MOAs would be great, but
realistically, what are you hoping to kind of?
So if projects said to me, we've engaged with these 20 companies, and of those 20 companies, 10 of them have shown an interest, and of those 10, 3 have said that they would commit to these things with those. That's the type of thing. So you go from the kind of big, higher level down to, well, what have you actually secured? And you would expect the secured to be lower, right? Because by nature of engagement and everything else. But what some of the projects are suffering with is that they don't have teams in place to do that legwork. They are relying on existing officers and existing staff to do these things. So
it's a role for your the office, your office, to basically be supporting this?
I have a business engagement manager who can support projects with these, but again, bless Peter, he's been caught up in all the stuff around the governance assurance type stuff. But now that we've recruited 4 new members of staff, all that should plateau out, and Peter can be released to get these things up and running with the projects as well. But yeah, and it's also utilising all the networks that we have in terms of business networks and existing relationships and building on those as well. We don't have to start everything from scratch by any means.
Yeah, fantastic. Mr. Shaw, did you want to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to say, I know we've had a couple of members who've left the meeting. I wonder whether I might check with Charlotte whether we core it or not.
Chair, we currently still have 8 in the meeting, 1 from each authority, so I would say yes, we're still core it.
That's kind, Charlotte. Mr. Chair, if you might remind or ask members to bear with the meeting to see it through, because otherwise we may run into a problem with being cored.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, thank you very much. Well, we've had a long discussion with Jonathan on many of the aspects. Are there any elements of the reports that you feel have been missed and you'd like to discuss? I'll open it up to a general.
Chair, there's one other thing. I've got 2 slides based on the funding award conditions. I think that's an important thing to share.
Okay, do you want to quickly go for them then?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just... so this was a report that you would have received, but let me just, as I said, there's only 2 slides. There's a bit more detail available to you, but let me just bring that up. Okay, so just to make sure everybody understands the funding award conditions, basically in pretty much this time last year, Welsh and UK government provided a release of funding offer letter, and in that there were 11 conditions. Included in those 11 conditions, there was one which was a subset, which had the ACTICA review recommendations, and there were 7 of those. So basically all those conditions, the 11 and the sub 7 for ACTICA, had to be met before drawdown of funds and approval of projects. So when I came in, I inherited the kind of update forms, the dialogue that took place between Welsh Government and the Swansea Bay City deal. Regionally, we feel that we completed everything, the 7 from ACTICA and the 11 conditions, and a report went to Joint Committee in July 2020. That report was then submitted to Welsh and UK Government for sign-off, and we're awaiting confirmation from the Welsh Government following the accounting officer review process. So that's kind of where we were. To give you a flavour of what those were, these are effectively the 11, but I've compressed them because it was a bit unwieldy. But a plan for addressing remaining recommendations from ACTICA, that was one of them. The integrated assurance and approval plan, and there was a thing called a stock take findings report. Complete the implementation plan that you've received, and an up-to-date monitoring evaluation plan, which I've produced since I've been in. Delivery of the recommendations, the independent review, an updated business case for Oregon and Waterfront, and making sure that they align to the Treasury Green Book. And then there were 6 specific conditions, 3 for Oregon, 3 for Waterfront as projects, and all of those were completed as well. So that's effectively what we've achieved. Well, this is before I came in, but that's my focus. Has been pretty much on these things. So what all of this, and the portfolio business case, which I think was my first bullet point on the first presentation, the portfolio business case is now the document that everything hangs off, and everything that we report on and everything that we update, including the deliverables and the targets and all those different things, are held within that document. So they're the only slides, Chair, that I wanted to just quickly share with you.
That's helpful. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any quick questions on that? No. Well, thank you very much for all that information, Jonathan. It was a very good discussion. Okay, in terms of the agenda, I'm going to push the forward work programme to the next meeting. We'll discuss that via email, any kind of additions that we want to include onto the meeting. I haven't received any urgent items. can I just apologise to the public and those members present that we haven't been able to sort out a simultaneous translation service at the moment. We will look to do it before the next meeting in some capacity. And I want to thank you all for attending the meeting today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Yes. Over.
Thank you very much.